In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your lower ball joint on your Ford Taurus. It's located behind your front wheel. Using a 19mm socket, I'll take off our lug nuts. Make sure you keep a hand on it for that last one. All right, we're going to use a 29mm socket, and we're going to undo our axle nut. All right, so now to take off this washer, I'm going to use a magnet, easiest way. So using a 10mm socket, I'm using a swivel with an extension. I'm going to undo my brake hose bracket. You can just let that flop to the side. Using an 18mm wrench on the head of the bolt and a 21mm socket on the nut of the bolt. We're going to take this out. I'm going to thread my nut back on a little bit so that I can tap it out. I'm going to put that on a little bit more so that I don't mushroom out the nut. I'm going to use my piece of wood, and I'm going to try to bang it out a little bit. Just get it to move. That's the goal. Make sure your brake hose isn't in the way, if you also have to do this. Our vehicle's kind of rusty, so that's why. Trying to separate this knuckle a little bit on the strut so we can slide the knuckle up on the strut in order to get the control arm out. So it's going to take some doing, but with a little patience, you'll get it. So I'm using a chisel, cold chisel in between the pinch area. I'm also trying to get the bolt to move a little. Using a pry bar. Use a piece of wood and a sledgehammer after you put your nut on that stud. All right, once you start seeing that axle start to move, you know it's free. All right, so I'm going to use some rust penetrant to get this knuckle to slide up and down on the strut. Use my sledgehammer. All right, so I'm using an 18mm socket and a pry bar to get this bolt out. So you're going to use some wire cutters. Undo your cotter pin. Might use a pick. Shake it around if your car's rusty like this. Rust typically doesn't like the shakes. I'm not cutting it off, I'm just pulling it out with these. All right, so now we're going to use a 17mm socket to take off our castle nut. Okay, so now you want to whack it right here. Just don't hit your fingers on that. That would hurt. I have my nut on the bottom of the tie rod, so I can go like that if needed. Okay, so that's free, so we're going to take our nut off. And pull it out. Using a 21mm socket and my air gun, I'm going to take this bottom nut off the ball joint. So I'm using this tool to separate the lower control arm from the ball joint. I'm going to put my lug nut on to hold it in place. So we're going to put a ratchet strap or something like it around the rotor here and hang on the spring. And the goal is to lift up the knuckle. All right, now that we have our ratchet strap holding up the knuckle by the studs, I'm gonna pry down on this pry bar and push this away and get that ball joint out, which is what I've done. Make sure your knuckle is supported before you take your axle out. Your tie rod's disconnected, your control arm's disconnected, you're ready to go. So I'm gonna pull this out, take my axle out. You might need a pry bar between the axle and the knuckle, just to get that last bit out and just steer it out of the way. Use your snap ring pliers to take off your snap ring. That's how you take these out. All right, so we have our ball joint tool hooked up. I'm using a socket to make sure I can push that ball joint through. Let's see how it goes. All right, so now we're going to change our socket out for a smaller size. Make sure you're centered. You got to adjust that socket a little bit. If you feel like the rubber pad is in your way, you can just peel that off. All right, let's try it again. All right, so once you get it mostly through, you're going to take your air chisel, and it should just pop out with a few bangs on this. All right, so now that that's out, we can clean this out, put the new one in. So here's the new one. It comes with its spring clip and cotter pin and its castle nut. So now we have to press the new ball joint in. Be careful not to break that rubber part. All right, so once you get it down, you're going to press it in. Okay, now you can back off your ball joint press. Okay, so now we're going to use our snap ring pliers to put our snap ring in place. Sometimes you got to give it a whack. Make sure it seats in there right. All right, so now at this point we're going to try to get the axle in the knuckle. You want to turn that in. Make sure it's lined up. Don't just jam it in there. Okay, once you have that in, you're going to want to put your nut on so it doesn't fall out again. But don't tighten it. Now you can pull this out so you have a little play. I'm going to pry down the control arm. I have a big pry bar and I'm using my leg, believe it or not, to hold that down while I steer my knuckle into where it belongs. Let's turn my ball joint out just to have it make it easier. Stand on that pry bar. You can also have a friend help you if needed. And push that knuckle in. And just check your work. Make sure everything's lined up so nothing falls out. We can take our ratchet strap off. So let's put our strap bolt in. You might have to tap it through. All right, so we put our bolt through, starting the nut on the other side. I'm using a 21mm long socket and my impact gun, and an 18mm on the head side. And we're gonna tighten up the strut. All right, we are gonna torque this pinch bolt to 59 foot-pounds. So we're going to put our brake hose back. So you're going to line up your brake hose bracket into the strut bracket. And then you're going to use your self-threading bolt and self-thread it into the bracket. Like that. Now you can put your ball joint nut on. So now you have all your nuts started. So let's tighten up this ball joint nut to 59 foot-pounds. So once you get your nut tight to 59 foot-pounds, you're going to see if your cotter pin fits through. If it doesn't, you can tighten it until it does, until it lines up. Don't ever loosen it. So I'm going to tighten mine up a tiny bit more to line up my hole better. That looks good. You're going to feed your cotter pin through and pull that part down. And then the other one can go around. You can use your fingers to start and then lock it down with some needle nose pliers. Usually tap it up a little bit and then I cut the excess off with some wire cutters. There we go. All right, so now we're going to place our tie rod back in the knuckle. Just line up the stud to go through. And then we're going to put our castle nut on. We're going to snug this up a little bit with our gun, and then we're going to torque it. Okay, so zip this on a little bit. And once you get it snugged, we're going to torque it to 41 foot-pounds. And you're going to look for your hole for your cotter pin. If it's lined up, great. If it's not, turn it towards tightening. You don't want to loosen it. Find the hole. You want to tighten it. All right, so now we're going to stick our cotter pin through. Mine's nice and lined up. And you want to pull this one up and over the stud, and then this one to the side. Just get rid of those ends. You can either hammer them down, push them down, or you can cut them off if it's too long, which I'm going to do here. And that will keep that nut from falling off. We're going to undo our axle nut. All right, we are going to put our washer and nut on. All right, so now we're going to put our axle nut on, tighten it up, and torque it. To do that, you're going to use a pry bar and put it between two lug nuts so that it doesn't turn when you're trying to turn the axle nut. You're not going to want to use an air gun or an electric gun to tighten your axle nut. Do it by hand. All right, so we're going to torque this to 184 foot-pounds. All right, so now we can take our lug nut off and put our wheel on. Make sure you put them on hand tight first, and you're going to tighten them in a star-like pattern using a 19mm socket. I usually do the bottom one first and walk the wheel on. Snug them up, and then we're going to be torquing them. Using a 19mm socket, we're going to torque our wheels to 95 foot-pounds. We're going to do it in a star-like pattern. I'm going to check it one more time, go all the way around. There, we're good.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.